Here we have some of the apps by Food Cloud Plus available on Microsoft App Source, and today we'll be discussing some of the functionalities of the Inventory Restrictions app. We'll go through an overview of what Inventory Restrictions is, how to set it up, and how the Inventory Restrictions app by Food Cloud Plus works in Business Central. Food manufacturers and distributors are frequently required to restrict specific warehouse and inventory transactions. Products may be restricted due to quality issues, audit procedures, inspections, or quarantining through inbound, outbound, or internal warehouse activities. With the Inventory Restrictions app by Food Cloud Plus, users can easily restrict inventory, such as items and products, from inbound, outbound, and warehouse transactions. Users can define a variety of inventory restriction codes to restrict inbound, outbound, and warehouse movement transactions, and apply multiple restriction codes to an item variant, lot, serial, or package. Users can also apply inventory restriction codes to a portion of an item lot and define default restrictions for an item. Before we can use the inventory restrictions functionality, we need to complete the following setup. We must complete our user setup, create inventory restriction codes, and complete our inventory restriction setup. It's important to note that the inventory restriction setup relates to sublots, which will be discussed later on in this video. To complete our user setup, we would simply search for the user setup page. And in this page, we can assign permissions to users regarding their ability to add or remove restrictions. For example, if I wanted to allow the user admin to both add and remove restrictions, I would click both the Add Restriction and Remove Restriction checkbox. To create inventory restriction codes, we would open up the Inventory Restriction Codes page and click on New. We'll fill in the fields as necessary. For example, I'll call this code RC3, and it will be for restricting warehouse bin movements. We can see in the Restrictions Fast tab that there are 3 separate sections. These are for the 3 different transaction types. We have the outbound transaction type, inbound, and warehouse. For this situation, I would want to go to the warehouse section and click on bin movements. We can make a variety of codes that reflect restrictions of any combination of inbound, outbound, and warehouse transactions. This can be done simply through selecting multiple buttons that pertain to the restriction that's intended. Now that we've gone through the setup process, we can see how the Inventory Restriction app works in Business Central through a series of scenarios. For our first scenario, let's assume we have a sales order for 100 cases of the item sausage for the customer, the meat shop. However, let's say in this scenario that the quality department has communicated to us that we need to restrict the outbound sales of the item sausage from lot DLT80 due to a potential quality concern that they have and that they need to investigate. So to do this, we would first go to our inventory restriction worksheet, and the item filter, we would select sausage. We'd click on calculate worksheet, and we'd see the lots available for this item. We'd click on DLT80, which is the lot that we want to impose a restriction on. We'd then click on line and add restriction. Now in this situation, we want to restrict outbound sales, and the code we have that reflects this is RC1. We can from here take a look at RC1 just one more time, and we can see that it is the sales button has been selected in the outbound section of the Restrictions Fast tab. So we'd select RC1, and we get a little message saying pending changes. To actually enforce this code and to apply it, we would need to click on register. Now the code has been registered and the restriction has been applied. So we can take a look at our sales orders. And here we have a sales order for the customer, the meat shop, and it is for 100 cases of the item sausage. Now it's important to note that this location ALP, warehouse shipments are required. Therefore, we're going to create a warehouse shipment. Now, from our warehouse shipment, we'll complete our item tracking. And the lot number we want to select is lot 80. This is the lot that we have imposed a restriction on. It is for 100 cases. And from here, if we were to post the shipment, we'd get a notification saying that the document has not been posted. 0 of the total 1 documents have been posted. And if we go to preview posting, we can get more information on the reason why. And here, of course, we get an error message saying that the transaction has been blocked by inventory restriction. This is, of course, because we have applied restriction code RC1 to the item sausage in lot DLT80. Now, let's say that the quality department has investigated the situation and they say that the item is now free to be sold again. So in this situation, we would want to remove the restriction that we've applied to lot DLT80. We'd open up our inventory restriction worksheet one more time, and we would enter sausage in the item filter, calculate worksheet, and here, of course, we can see lot DLT80 is bolded in red. If we select lot DLT80, go to line, and this time press remove restriction, we can remove the restriction code of RC1 from this lot. Click on RC1. Once again, we get the pending changes message. We click on home and we register. Now the code has been removed, and this time, if we were to go back to our sales order, we click on related, warehouse shipment lines, and we open up our warehouse shipment again. This time, and of course we can see that the item tracking has not changed. We are still selecting lot DLT80. But now if we post the shipment, it is completed and it is removed from the warehouse shipment lines. So back to our sales order. From here, we can then invoice, and we can see that the invoice has been completed. In this scenario, we're going to take a look at inventory restriction groups and some other functionalities. Let's assume we want to create a restriction group code to attach to the item spicy sausage, and we want this code to encapsulate 2 restriction codes, one to restrict outbound sales and one to restrict warehouse bin movements. To do so, we would open up our inventory restriction groups page and click on new to create a new restriction group code. We'll call this RG1 and we'll describe it as restricting outbound sales and warehouse bin movements. We can see here that there are 3 fields: the entry type field, the inventory restriction code field, and the inventory restriction description field. The entry type field is the field that dictates the transaction type of the code we want to apply. The 2 options are receipt transaction types and output transaction types. For both of the codes we want to use in this scenario, we'll be selecting the receipt transaction type. Of course, in the inventory restriction code field, we'll select the code that we want to apply. Of course, here we have RC1, which is the restriction of outbound sales. However, we could also click on new to create a new code. Again, our second code will also be for the receipt transaction type. And this second code will be RC3, which is the restriction of warehouse bin movements. So, because the 2 transaction types of our 2 codes are receipt transaction types, this means that once we create this group code and attach it to an item, the quantity of that item that we receive will have these restrictions of the restriction group code applied to it. So let's attach code RG1 to an item. We're going to open up the item card of spicy sausage. And if we go to the inventory fast tab, we can see there's a field for inventory restriction group code. Here we'll enter RG1. So now we've attached the code to an item. We can, for example, receive a quantity of this item through a purchase order. So here I have a purchase order from the vendor meat producer. And it is for 500 cases of the item spicy sausage. And in this location, location ALP, warehouse receipts are required. So we're going to create a warehouse receipt. We'll scroll to our item tracking. And we're going to assign a lot number and a package number. So now this means that the quantity of the item sausage we receive is going to go to lot 4. And that also means that the restriction codes of restriction group RG1 will be applied to the quantity of spicy sausage in lot 4 in package 1. So now from here, we're going to post. And we're also going to invoice our purchase order. So now that we've received a quantity of spicy sausage, we can see how the restriction codes part of restriction group 1, RG1, have been applied to this quantity that we've received. If we open up our inventory restriction worksheet and we enter spicy sausage in the item filter and click on calculate worksheet, we can see that in the third line here, lot 4 is bolded in red, implying that there are restrictions, or at least one restriction applied to this lot. And if we look at the inventory restrictions fact box towards the right, we can see that the two codes applied are RC1 and RC3. And of course, these are the two codes that are a part of our restriction group code, RG1. And of course, we can take another look at each of these codes individually, seeing that RC1 is the restriction of outbound sales, and RC3 down here is the restriction of bin movements. So now we can see the application of these restrictions in action. Regarding RC1 and the restriction of outbound sales, we can open up a sales order. And here we have one for the customer, the meat shop, and it is for 100 cases of spicy sausage. Of course, because location ALP requires warehouse shipment, we're going to create a warehouse shipment. Here we're going to complete our item tracking. And in the lot, we're going to enter lot 4, as this is the lot number that the restriction group has been applied to. Our quantity is 100 cases. And from here, if we were to post the shipment, we're going to get a notification saying that 0 of the 1 documents have been posted. And if we look at preview posting, we can get more information. And here we see the error message says that the transaction is blocked because of an inventory restriction, which is the result of RC1, restriction code 1, that is part of our inventory restriction group, RG1, that has been applied to the quantity of spicy sausage that we have received. Furthermore, if we want to see the application of restriction code 3, RC3, we can go to our item reclassification journal. And here we have the reclassification journal line for spicy sausage. However, we want to move the quantity of spicy sausage from the receipt bin to the ship bin. And it's going to be for 200 cases. And if we complete our item tracking, once again, our lot is lot 4, as that is the lot that has a restriction imposed on it. And our quantity is 200. Here, if we were to post the journal line, we can see that we get a notification saying that the transaction has been blocked because of an inventory restriction. Of course, again, this is because of restriction code 3, RC3, that is again part of the inventory restriction group we had applied to the quantity of spicy sausage we had received. Now we're going to take a look at sublots. The sublot capability allows you to place restrictions on a portion of a specific lot number. When the inventory of an item lot is not homogeneous, you may want to segregate some part of the inventory and restrict it for further action. You may then remove all restrictions from the sublot and combine it with its parent or another sublot. Before we can get started with the sublot functionality, we must make sure that our inventory restriction setup is complete. If we go to the inventory restriction setup page, we'll see 3 distinct fields: the sublot separator, sublot counter format, and the default sublot rule. The sublot separator indicates the value that is to be used whenever we create a sublot and how it's going to be differentiated from the original sublot number. The sublot counter format indicates the format that we want to use for our new sublot separator. So this is what will be appearing after the sublot separator is included, and we have the option to go from increments of 1 digit to 6. And the default sublot rule simply states the default value of the default sublot rule field that appears whenever we want to create a new sublot. So in this situation, our sublot separator is a hyphen, and we have chosen the counter to have a format of 3 digits, and our default sublot rule is set to creating a new sublot. Now that we've completed our setup, let's take a look at a scenario. We're going to open up the inventory restriction worksheet, and in the item filter, we're going to select an item. Here, for example, the item breakfast sausage. Now, when we calculate the worksheet, we can see that we have 2 distinct lots for this item. Now, let's say that in this scenario, we want to create a sublot containing 50 units of the item breakfast sausage contained in lot DLT100. And we want to do so because we want to inspect this quantity, and if there are any concerns, we can apply a restriction. To do so, we're going to click on the line DLT100. We'll click on line, reclass sublot, and we'll fill in the necessary fields. In the quantity to sublot field, we're going to enter in 50, which is the quantity that we want to include in the sublot. We'll select our location and the bin this quantity comes from. For example, here the ship bin. And we're going to keep the new sublot default that we had selected in our inventory restriction setup. We have the option to merge or create a new sublot, but because we're creating a new sublot, we will keep the new sublot option. Now we also have the option to create and assign reason codes that describe the reasoning behind this reclassification of a sublot. Here, for example, I'll include INSP, which is for inspection, and the include existing restrictions option, when turned on, will apply all restrictions imposed on the parent to the child sublot in instances of creating a new sublot, and in instances of merging, it will apply all restrictions imposed on the child to the parent and vice versa. So from here, if we click on OK, we can see that we have a third line, lot DLT100-3. This is the sublot that we've created, and it includes 50 units of the item that have been taken from lot DLT100. The original 500 units from lot DLT100 has now been reduced to 450. Now, if we take a look at the lot number, we can see that it's followed the rules that we imposed in our inventory restriction setup. The separator is a hyphen, and the format we chose was the 3-digit format, and this is the third sublot. So now from here, let's say that upon inspection, we realize that we need to impose a restriction on this sublot. We can impose this restriction on just the sublot alone, and to do so, we would click on Add Restriction, and let's assume we want to restrict outbound sales, so we'll select restriction code RC1. We'll register. And when we calculate the worksheet, we can see that the sublot DLT 100-3 has been bolded in red, implying that there is some form of restriction imposed. We click on the line and look at the inventory restrictions fact box. We can see that the code applied to this sublot is code RC1, which of course is the restriction of inbound or outbound sales. Now, let's say, for example, that we want to remove this restriction. We'll click on line, remove restriction. We'll select RC1, and we will register. Now from here, we can see that the restriction has been removed from lot DLT 100-3, as the inventory restrictions fact box does not include any restriction code. And now we can assume that we want to merge this sublot back to its parent. To do so, we would select the sublot, click on line, reclass sublot once again. We'll enter in the quantity that we want to merge. We'll merge the whole 50 units. We'll select the location and the bin. And now instead of selecting the option to create a new sublot, we're going to select merge. In addition, we'll fill out the lot number field, which is the lot number of the parent, which in this case is lot DLT 100. We can also include a reason code, and since we've toggled on the include existing restrictions option, any restriction that would have been imposed on the child sublot would have also been applied to the parent. However, since we've removed the restriction from the sublot before merging, there will be no restriction codes applied to the parent. We click on OK, we can see that the third line has been removed, and the quantity of inventory in lot DLT 100 has returned to its original 500. Another important feature to consider is the remove from available inventory option that we've selected for many of our restriction codes thus far. To review what the remove from available inventory option was, let's apply another restriction to this lot, restricting outbound sales, code RC1. Now, if we take another look at code RC1, we can see that we've selected the remove from available inventory option. When this option is selected, any quantity that has this particular restriction code applied to it will be removed from our quantity of available inventory. For example, if we look at lot DLT3 for the item breakfast sausage, and we go to our items, we select breakfast sausage, we click on item availability by lot. In this page, we can see a breakdown of the available inventory and the overall inventory separated by lots. So for the item breakfast sausage in lot DLT3, we have an inventory of 4,500 units, and our available inventory is also 4,500 units. However, lot DLT 100, which is the lot that we have just applied this restriction code to, while the inventory is 500 units, the available inventory is 0. This available inventory is set to 0 because we have selected the remove from available inventory option for the restriction code that has been applied to this lot, restriction code RC1. So now if we were to go back and actually remove this restriction, we remove RC1 and register. And now if we go back to that view, we'll click on item availability by lot. We can see now that formerly, when lot DLT 100 had an inventory of 500 and an available inventory of 0, the available inventory has now been set to 500. This is because we've removed the code altogether. However, if we were to actually apply the code and just toggle off the remove from available inventory option, we would have the same result. However, the restriction code would still be applied. So if I go ahead and I apply RC1 to lot DLT 100 once again, however, this time we can take a look at the code and edit it and then turn off the remove from available inventory option. This way, if we go back to the items and back to the view of our available inventory, we can see that even though the restriction code is still applied to lot DLT 100, our inventory is 500 and our available inventory is still 500 as opposed to being 0. The Inventory Restriction app by FoodCloud Plus allows users to restrict items from further transactions during inbound, outbound, and internal warehouse activities. With inventory restriction, users can ensure compliance with quality audit standards and minimize the risk of errors and contaminations.